What if the baby you saved by accident turned out to belong to a billionaire mother who wasn't just grateful but came back for you? In a quiet town where nothing ever changes, a reclusive mechanic finds an abandoned 5-month-old baby tucked beneath the wing of a private jet. He has no idea that one act of kindness will unravel a story of loss, healing, and a second chance at love. This is the last plane out of Hope Springs, a story about how compassion can rewrite destiny and how sometimes the life you think is over is just beginning. If you believe in the quiet power of kindness and second chances, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss more inspiring stories like this one. Now sit back and let me take you to Hope Springs. A poor mechanic saved a 5-month-old baby by the plane, then her billionaire mom returned for him. The wind rolled across the Montana plains like a memory that never settled. Dry, restless, always whispering of things lost. Eli Carter stood beneath the belly of a 1978 Beechcraft Baron, sleeves rolled up, a streak of grease down one forearm, and a socket wrench in his right hand that hadn't let go since 7 a.m. His left knee pressed into the cracked concrete floor of Hangar 3, a hangar older than most marriages, with rusted rivets and a roof that whined when the wind pushed too hard. Like today. The Baron hadn't flown in months. No one came to Hope Springs Municipal Airport anymore. At least not the kind of people who flew. Most of them had long since moved on to cities where the jobs didn't require knowing the difference between a carburetor and a fuel primer. Eli stayed, because staying was simpler than starting over. A portable radio perched on a workbench nearby played oldies with the static of low reception, like even the music was hesitant to stay. He hummed lowly, not in tune, not out of habit, just to fill the space. Outside the open hangar door, the flat, golden prairie shimmered beneath a late summer sun. The only other sound was the occasional squawk of a magpie circling the weathered fence line. Eli glanced at the clock above the hangar's entrance. Nearly 5:30. He exhaled through his nose, pulled the wrench from the engine compartment, and let his hand fall into his lap, absently rolling his shoulder. It had started aching more lately. Not age, memory. He rubbed the ache away and stood, stretching until the vertebrae in his back cracked like knuckles. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It was faint, soft, nearly swallowed by the wind, but unmistakable, a baby crying. Eli froze. He turned his head slowly toward the open hangar doors. The sound was clearer now, distant but there, thin and high-pitched, coming from the row of planes parked on the outer edge of the tarmac. No one had flown in today. The last scheduled flight had been 2 days ago, a private charter he hadn't even touched. The aircraft had been towed to the maintenance yard just that morning. The crying came again, closer now, desperate. Eli wiped his hands on a rag and walked briskly toward the sound, his boots crunching on gravel. His mind reeled. Was someone in trouble? Had a parent forgotten their child? No, that didn't happen. Not here. Behind a silver Gulfstream, near the rear cargo access hatch, he saw it. A baby carrier. Inside, a tiny girl, no more than 5 or 6 months old, flushed red from crying, fists clenched in the air, her legs kicking like she was trying to fly away from whatever terror her little world had collapsed into. "Hey there," Eli murmured, crouching slowly. His voice cracked. "Hey now. It's okay." The baby didn't calm, but she didn't cry harder either. He reached for her cautiously, as though any sudden movement might send her crumbling. There was no adult in sight, no note. Just a small canvas diaper bag beside the carrier. He checked inside, 2 bottles of formula, a small blanket, a pacifier, and a single photograph of the child with a woman whose face was partially out of frame. A high-end stroller sat folded nearby, partially hidden under the wing. He looked around, deserted. His heart pounded harder now, not from fear but from something older, deeper. A muscle memory of fatherhood he thought he'd buried years ago. Eli picked up the carrier and started toward the operations office, the baby still sniffling softly. This wasn't something he could ignore, but he also couldn't leave her. Joe Mercer, the airport's acting supervisor and a friend of Eli's late father, looked up from his desk when Eli walked in. "Joe," Eli said, voice tight, "we've got a situation." 20 minutes later, the baby was wrapped in a receiving blanket in Eli's arms, her breathing even. Joe had tried reaching the county sheriff, but their only unit was on a call an hour out. The local CPS contact was away until morning, and as fate would have it, the airport's security system had been offline for maintenance since early afternoon. "She's not hurt," Eli said quietly, glancing down at her. "Just scared and hungry." Joe pinched the bridge of his nose. "You're the only man I know with a steady enough hand and enough heart to keep her safe tonight." Eli didn't respond. He wasn't sure if it was heart that made him say yes or guilt, but he said it anyway. That night, the little girl slept in a drawer lined with towels and flannel in Eli's apartment above the hangar. He sat nearby in the old rocking chair his wife had once used, the one he swore he'd never move again. Her name, he still didn't know it. He began calling her Birdie, because she chirped when she dreamed, and because somehow this child, left in the belly of a silent plane, had begun to stir something in him, something that felt like sky. The sun dipped behind the cottonwood trees, casting long shadows across the tarmac as Eli stood at the window of the operations office, arms folded, gaze fixed on the airplane hangar across the lot. The baby, Birdie, as he decided to call her, was asleep in the makeshift cradle fashioned from a supply drawer, lined with clean towels and one of his old flannel shirts. Joe had gone home for the night, but not before giving Eli a quiet look of trust. "I'll notify the sheriff again first thing in the morning," he'd said. "You'll be all right?" "I'll manage," Eli replied. What he didn't say was that he hadn't held a baby in his arms since his own daughter had died just 24 hours after birth. That was 3 years ago. He still remembered the way her tiny hand had barely curled around his finger. He remembered the impossible weight of something so light when she was gone. Now somehow, he was here. Again. But it wasn't the same. Nothing could be the same. And yet, that soft breath of the baby against his chest just hours earlier had quieted a part of him that had been screaming for years. Later that evening, in his apartment above the hangar, Eli moved quietly through the narrow kitchen. He had found a formula bottle in the diaper bag, and after boiling some water, was attempting to get the temperature just right. He tested a drop against the inside of his wrist and nodded to himself. His hands were too big, too rough for this kind of thing, but somehow they knew what to do. Birdie stirred in her drawer nest nearby, letting out a half cry, more like a question than a demand. Eli turned quickly, crouching beside her with the bottle ready. "Easy now," he murmured, easing the nipple into her searching mouth. She latched without hesitation, drinking like she hadn't eaten in hours. Maybe she hadn't. He watched her in the dim lamplight, the way her brow furrowed, the way her fingers flexed like tiny antennae sensing the world. Something about her quieted the hangar, softened the harsh edges of the world outside. He didn't realize he was humming until she paused to blink up at him. His wife used to hum that same tune when she held their baby in the hospital. The melody spilled out of him without effort, half lullaby, half memory. Birdie's eyelids fluttered, then closed. Her breathing evened out again. "You're a tough little thing," he whispered. She didn't answer, of course. But in the hush that followed, Eli felt something shift inside him. Not dramatically, just a degree or two. But it was enough to feel like the start of a thaw. The next morning arrived on a golden breath of sunlight through the hangar windows. Eli woke early, back aching slightly from sleeping on the couch, ears tuned to every sound the baby made. When he peeked into the drawer, Birdie was awake, her wide gray eyes blinking up at him like he was something she was still deciding about. "Morning, Birdie," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "You and me, we're a long way from ordinary, huh?" She cooed softly in reply, kicking her legs like she agreed. He gave her a sponge bath with warm water, using the soft towel from the supply closet. The way she relaxed into his hands, so trusting, so instinctively calm, tugged something loose in his chest. He'd built his whole life on knowing how to fix broken things. But this wasn't a job for tools or torque. This was something else, something far more fragile. Around 8 a.m., Joe returned with coffee and news. "No one's come forward yet," he said, handing Eli a steaming paper cup. "Sheriff's still investigating, but so far no reports of a missing child. No note, no ID." Eli took a slow sip. "You're saying no one's even looking for her? Could be a private handoff gone wrong, or someone panicked. We'll get answers. But until then..." Joe didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Until then, Birdie was Eli's. The day passed slowly. Eli couldn't bring himself to return to the Beechcraft Baron. His attention drifted to Bertie, making sure she was comfortable, changing her, even walking her across the hangar floor in his arms when she fussed. She responded best to movement, to the sound of his heartbeat. By mid-afternoon, the town had started to take notice. A local delivery driver poked his head into the hangar and raised a brow. "New apprentice?" "Temporary," Eli said, a bit too quickly. Mrs. Dobbins, the widow who lived near the edge of the airport property, stopped by with a plastic bag of gently used baby clothes and a knowing smile. "I heard something about a baby," she said. "Figured she'd need more than your oversized t-shirts." Eli was surprised but grateful. "Thank you, ma'am. Don't mention it. Town's small, but our hearts aren't." That night, as the sun melted into the horizon and the prairie lit up like a field of gold, Eli sat with Bertie in his lap near the open hangar door. The air was cool but pleasant. A gentle breeze played with the wisps of her hair. "You're going to leave eventually," he said quietly, almost more to himself than to her. "You're real, Mom. Whoever she is, she's going to show up, and that'll be that." Bertie stirred, yawned, and curled her fingers around one of his. Eli closed his eyes. "I just hope, wherever you go, they love you like you deserve." The stars over Hope Springs didn't shine the way they used to, or maybe Eli had just stopped looking up. It was past 1 a.m., and the lights in the apartment above Hangar 3 were dimmed except for the soft yellow glow of the lamp perched on the kitchen counter. The apartment was modest. Linoleum floors, single worn couch, a kitchenette with an old kettle that whistled even when it wasn't supposed to. It wasn't made for guests, much less babies, but it was all he had. Bertie stirred in the drawer beside the couch, his makeshift bassinet now lined with a fresh set of blankets, courtesy of Mrs. Dobbins. Eli leaned over her, eyes heavy with fatigue, but alert. "Hey, hey, I'm right here," he whispered, voice like gravel softened by rain. She wasn't crying, not really, just restless. Her tiny fists flailed in slow, sleepy arcs, as if trying to catch hold of something she couldn't name. Eli picked her up carefully, holding her close. The motion was becoming familiar now, his body remembering what his heart had tried to forget. He settled into the rocking chair near the window, the same chair that had belonged to his wife, Rachel, the same chair he hadn't touched since the day they'd returned from the hospital with one less heartbeat than they'd hoped. Bertie's head nestled against his chest, warm and impossibly light. He rocked her gently, back and forth, the creak of the old wooden joints lulling them both into a rhythm that seemed to exist outside of time. His hand moved instinctively to the back of her head, cradling her like he had once cradled dreams. "You've got lungs on you, I'll give you that," he murmured. She made a soft, inquisitive noise. Not quite a laugh, but not quite a cry either. Then something happened. As he hummed, soft and off-key, the way Rachel used to when she was folding laundry or cooking dinner, Bertie looked up. Her wide eyes found his in the lamplight, and for the briefest of moments, her mouth curved into something undeniable. A smile. It wasn't gas. It wasn't coincidence. It was real. Eli froze, throat tightening, breath catching, the kind of smile that didn't ask for anything, the kind that just was. "Well," he whispered, blinking fast, "aren't you full of surprises?" He hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone had smiled at him like that, not out of politeness or obligation, but out of simple, childlike trust. Bertie's eyes slowly closed again. Sleep reclaimed her with a gentleness the world didn't often offer. Eli rocked her a little longer, unwilling to break the moment. In the morning, a light rain pattered on the hangar roof. It was the kind of rain Montana rarely got in late summer. Steady, clean, and quietly persuasive. Eli moved slowly, every muscle in his body feeling like it had been through something sacred and exhausting. He brewed coffee, half-strength, and toasted a slice of bread he didn't really want. His eyes kept drifting back to the drawer where Bertie lay, now wrapped like a burrito in a fresh swaddle, her breathing soft and rhythmic. He heard a knock at the hangar door around 9 a.m. He opened it to find Pastor John Everett in his usual wool cardigan and wide-brimmed hat, standing with a modest brown bag in hand. "Heard from Joe you've got company," John said, nodding toward the apartment upstairs. Eli rubbed the back of his neck. "You know how this town is." Nothing wrong with a man doing the right thing. The pastor handed him the bag. Just a few jars of baby food my daughter made. Apples, sweet potato, nothing fancy but healthy. Eli accepted the bag with a small nod. Appreciate it. John hesitated. If you ever want someone to talk to, someone who listens without fixing, I'm around. I'll keep that in mind, Eli said, not unkindly. After the pastor left, Eli stood alone at the door, listening to the rain. He wasn't used to people offering help without expecting something in return. Not anymore. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe that's why it had taken him 3 years to feel anything again. He returned upstairs and found Bertie awake, waving her hands in slow motion like she was conducting a silent orchestra. He crouched beside the drawer. You've got everyone fussing over you already. Like you own the place. She cooed. He couldn't help but smile. You and me, he said. Just temporary, though. You're going back where you belong soon enough. But even as he said it, a small, traitorous part of him hoped it wasn't true. Later that afternoon, while Eli worked under the hood of a grounded crop duster, he kept Bertie in a nearby playpen that one of the airport staff had dropped off. He adjusted the bolts with methodical precision, but his eyes kept drifting toward her. She babbled to herself, waving a plush toy elephant above her head with wild, imprecise glee. Every so often she looked at him, and every time Eli felt a pull, a reminder that something inside him was still alive, something that hadn't died with Rachel, something that maybe could grow again. That night, just before sleep, he stood with Bertie in his arms by the open hangar doors. The rain had stopped. The moon rose over the flat horizon, wide and gold like a coin resting on velvet. Eli looked out into the darkness, the baby's soft breath against his neck. He wasn't thinking about tomorrow, or the questions still unanswered, or even who had left her behind. He was just thinking, maybe for now, this is enough. By the third day, word had spread. Not loudly, not cruelly. But Hope Springs was the kind of place where news didn't need volume, just breath. A whisper in the hardware store, a nod in the diner. And suddenly everyone knew. Eli Carter, the quiet mechanic who hadn't set foot in church since Rachel's funeral, was taking care of a baby. Some thought it sweet, some thought it strange. A few, predictably, thought it suspicious. Eli didn't care what they thought. At least that's what he told himself. But he could feel it when he drove into town for supplies. The sideways glances at the grocery store, the way the cashier asked, "Yours?" with a tone that tried and failed to sound neutral. "No," Eli had answered simply, placing a box of formula and a pack of diapers on the counter. "Just temporary." He paid in cash and left before the next question arrived. Back at the hangar, he tried to focus on the carburetor of the twin-engine Cessna that had refused to start since July. But Bertie had other plans. She was getting louder. Not in a bad way, just exploratory. Her little voice now cooed and gurgled with more confidence, especially when she saw Eli. She had discovered that banging her tiny fist against the side of the playpen made noise, and that if she did it long enough, Eli would glance up from whatever bolt or panel he was hunched over and smile. He was doing that now, smiling despite himself, as he wiped grease off his hands and leaned against the workbench. "Getting pushy, huh?" he said. She blew a spit bubble in response. That afternoon, as the sun began to dip toward the hills, the hangar door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. Eli looked up, instinctively shifting to block Bertie from view. It was Trudy Mathers, who ran the town's small daycare center and had known Eli since he was a kid. "I figured I'd stop by," she said, adjusting her purse strap. "Heard you've got a little guest." Eli nodded cautiously. "Just until the sheriff figures things out." Trudy's gaze shifted toward the playpen. Bertie let out a delighted squeal, utterly unbothered by the stranger. "She looks well taken care of," Trudy said after a pause. "I'm doing what I can." "I'm not here to judge, Eli. You know that. I just wanted to check in. You're not exactly set up for this sort of thing." "I didn't plan on it. No one ever does." She stepped closer, voice softening. "If you need help, real help, there are folks who can assist. I know it's not easy, doing this alone." "I'm not alone," he said, more defensively than he meant. Trudy gave him a long, searching look. "All right," she said gently. "Just know you're not being watched for mistakes. People are curious, but mostly they care. With that, she reached into her purse and pulled out a soft pink beanie, hand-knitted and small enough to fit a grapefruit. She handed it over without ceremony. "Montana nights are getting cooler," she said, "and that little one's ears are like paper." Eli took it, swallowed hard, and gave a single tight nod. "Thanks, Trudy." She smiled and left without another word. That night, as the baby slept in her drawer nest, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts, Eli sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the beanie in his hand. The yarn was soft, the stitches neat and practiced. Someone had made this with love, or at least with care. He hadn't asked for help, but help had come anyway. That unsettled him more than the stares, because deep down, he knew he was beginning to hope again. And hope was dangerous. The next morning, Joe walked into the hangar with a folder and a look Eli didn't like. "Anything?" Eli asked, holding Bertie in one arm as she tried to chew on the collar of his shirt. Joe sighed. "Still nothing? No reports of a missing child. No one's come forward. It's like she dropped out of the sky." Eli's stomach twisted. "What's the plan?" "For now, sheriff's going to file paperwork with the county, temporary guardianship while they investigate. You'll be listed as emergency caretaker." "Is that even legal?" Joe shrugged. "It's Montana. It's small-town common sense. You're the only one she trusts, and frankly, the only one who's shown up." Eli looked down at Bertie, who blinked up at him with sleepy defiance. "And if someone does come forward," he asked, "then the process starts. DNA test, verification, the usual." Eli nodded slowly. "But until then, she stays." Joe patted his shoulder. "Until then, she stays." That evening, as twilight wrapped the plains in lavender light, Eli took Bertie out for a walk around the tarmac. She was snug in the sling Mrs. Dobbins had dropped off earlier that day, her cheek pressed against his chest. The hangar lights flickered on behind them, casting long shadows. The world smelled like dry grass and jet fuel, familiar and strange all at once. As they passed the silver Gulf Stream where Bertie had first been found, Eli paused. He didn't know who had left her there. He didn't know why. And part of him still resented that someone could abandon a child so easily. But another part of him, the part waking up slowly, painfully, was grateful. Because whoever had left her had given him something he didn't know he still had room for. A reason to feel again. A reason to stay. The sky was the color of pewter, low and heavy, threatening a storm that couldn't quite make up its mind. Eli stood under the wing of the Gulf Stream, tightening a bolt with more force than necessary. Bertie was sleeping inside the hangar in her crib-turned drawer, her breast steady, a pink beanie pulled low over her ears. She had started sleeping longer at night, 3, sometimes 4 hours at a time, which meant Eli could finally think again. But thinking was dangerous. It brought him too close to questions that had no answers. Who was she? Why had no one come forward? And why, despite every logical reason not to, was he already dreading the day someone finally did? The wind shifted. He heard the crunch of tires on gravel before he saw the vehicle. A black SUV with government plates slowed near the front of the hangar, the engine purring like a caged animal. It was sleek, out of place, too clean for Hope Springs, the kind of car that didn't belong on a tarmac covered in prairie dust. Eli stepped out from behind the jet and watched as the passenger door opened. The woman who stepped out was tall and striking, though she wore fatigue like armor. Her dark hair was pulled into a low, efficient bun. She wore simple jeans, boots that had seen wear, and a long navy coat dusted with travel. Her face, even behind oversized sunglasses, betrayed something fractured, like a porcelain cup someone had glued back together too quickly. She looked around as if she didn't quite trust the sky. Then her eyes landed on him. "Are you Eli Carter?" she asked, her voice low, guarded. "I am," he said, wary but steady. She stepped closer, removing her glasses. Her eyes, gray, sharp, and rimmed with exhaustion, studied him like a puzzle she didn't want to solve. "I think you have my daughter." Inside the hangar, silence took on a new shape. Bertie was in her drawer cradle, fingers twitching in a dream. Eli stood just a few steps ahead of the woman, not blocking her view but not moving aside either. "You're the mother?" he asked slowly. "Yes," she said. "Her name is Avery." The name struck something deep inside him. Bertie, he thought. No, Avery. He nodded once as if that simple confirmation changed everything. Maybe it did. I'm sorry, she added, voice catching. I didn't mean to leave her behind. There was an emergency. Eli didn't respond. His body was still, but inside every cell was reaching for clarity. Charlotte looked down, collecting herself. I was flying in for a private inspection. This airport. My company is looking to acquire the land for redevelopment. I brought Avery because my nanny canceled last minute. I had a trusted assistant on board, or so I thought. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. After we landed, I left the plane briefly to meet with a local official. When I returned, the assistant was gone. The plane had been moved. The baby was gone. Her voice broke, not dramatically, but like something brittle snapping under pressure. I called the police. They said she might be in temporary care. But no one called me. No one told me she was with... She looked at Eli again, and this time something softened in her tone. You. Eli nodded slowly. They were trying to verify identity. We had no documentation. No one came forward. Charlotte moved past him carefully, her eyes locked on the child in the drawer. She dropped to her knees and reached out, not to lift Avery, but to touch her cheek. Avery stirred at the contact and opened her eyes. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then she smiled. Charlotte pressed her lips together, and a tear slipped free. Not from hysteria, not even sorrow, just the sheer weight of everything that hadn't been said. Eli stepped back and gave her space. After a long moment, Charlotte stood again. You took care of her. He nodded once. I tried. She looks calm, healthy, like someone's been singing to her. I hum, mostly out of habit. Her eyes met his. Thank you. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply said, She's a good kid. A pause settled between them, thick but not uncomfortable. Eli could see the questions rising in her eyes. Who are you? Why are you here? Why did you stay? Instead, she asked none of them. Do you have a minute? She said instead. I'd like to talk. Not about legal stuff. Just talk. They sat at the folding table in the corner of the hangar, mugs of gas station coffee between them. Avery remained sleeping under the warm glow of a work lamp. Charlotte explained more slowly this time how her company, Whitmore Innovations, had been scouting small-town properties to convert into tech-adjacent logistics hubs. How she'd been working 70-hour weeks, raising a daughter mostly alone, trying to prove she could be both brilliant and maternal in a world that rarely rewarded women for being both. I didn't mean to become one of those people, she said, tracing the rim of her mug. The kind who bring babies on jets like accessories. I didn't trust anyone else. You left her with someone you did trust, Eli said gently, and they failed you. She looked up, surprised by his lack of judgment. He continued, I don't know much about tech or boardrooms, but I know when someone loves their kid. Charlotte's shoulders dropped slightly, like she hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding herself. You're not what I expected, she said quietly. Neither are you. They sat in companionable silence after that, the storm outside finally deciding to let loose a light rain. When she rose to leave, she lingered beside the drawer for a long moment, watching Avery sleep. Then she turned to Eli. I'll be back tomorrow. I need to finalize some things in town. But more than that, I'd like her to stay the night here. Just one more. She's safe, and she's clearly happy. Eli blinked. You're sure? I'm not sure of anything, she said with a tired smile, except that you care, and that matters more than all the legal paperwork in the world. She paused. Besides, she seems to think you're her person. He didn't know what to say, so he nodded, and she left. The name Avery echoed softly in Eli's mind, long after Charlotte had driven away. He sat beside the drawer where the baby slept, watching her tiny chest rise and fall in the rhythm of deep, innocent sleep. Birdie had suited her somehow, wild and delicate, light and unpredictable. But now he knew her name. Avery. It was strong, gentle, like wind that could lift you or knock you flat. He whispered it once into the quiet. Avery. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. Her fingers twitched in a dream. Eli leaned back against the wall, arms folded loosely across his chest. It had been years since his world had shifted in the span of a single day. The last time it had shattered. This time, he wasn't sure what to call it, only that something had cracked open, and this time light was getting in. The next morning, Charlotte returned. No security detail, no assistant. Just her, jeans, boots, a soft gray sweater that made her look like someone who had finally given herself permission to breathe. She walked into the hangar like she'd done it 100 times before, carrying a tote bag and a small bouquet of sunflowers. "I didn't know what babies actually need," she said with a half laugh, "so I brought flowers and snacks. One of those is for you." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Not much of a flower guy." "Good," she said. "I brought the flowers for her. The snacks are for you." He took the bag with a nod of thanks. Inside, a thermos of strong coffee, a banana, and a cinnamon muffin that still felt warm. He wasn't used to being thought of like someone worth packing for. Charlotte bent down and scooped Avery up from her drawer crib with practiced hands, then paused. "She doesn't cry when I hold her anymore," she said softly. "That used to be a regular thing." "She's had practice," Eli said. "Lots of hours being held." "She smells like jet fuel and sawdust." He smiled. "Yeah, that'd be me." Charlotte sat down on the low bench near the workbench. Avery perched on her lap like a soft, curious owl. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Sure." "Why didn't you call the news or post about it online? You could have gone viral in a day. Mechanic saves abandoned baby at rural airport. People eat that stuff up." Eli shrugged. "Didn't feel like my story to tell." Charlotte looked at him as if she wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. "Do you always think like that?" "Mostly just when it matters." She nodded, biting her bottom lip. Then quietly, "Thank you." They didn't speak for a while after that, but it wasn't silence. It was something softer, like rest. Later, Eli showed her the inner workings of the Beechcraft Baron he'd been refurbishing. She asked surprisingly good questions. At one point, she leaned against the metal fuselage and said, "You know, I always thought planes were sterile, cold, but this feels almost living." "They are," Eli said. "At least the ones that still fly. You treat them right, they return the favor." Charlotte looked at him with something like admiration. "You talk about machines the way I talk about code. You build software?" "I build everything," she said, not bragging, just stating fact. "Design, architecture, security protocols, user experience. It's like sculpting, except the tools change every 6 months and everyone's mad all the time." Eli smiled. "Sounds awful." She grinned. "It is, but I love it." There was a moment, fleeting but potent, where neither of them looked away. Then Avery babbled from her stroller, and the spell broke. That afternoon, Charlotte joined him at the folding table for lunch. They ate leftover stew from Joe's thermos, shared crackers, and watched as Avery tried valiantly to wriggle free from her blanket. Charlotte leaned forward, resting her chin on her palm. "You know what I realized this morning?" "What's that?" "I haven't been in one place this long in nearly 6 years, not since Avery's father left." Eli's eyes flicked toward her, but he said nothing. "I thought I needed motion to matter," she continued. "Deals, deadlines, airports, cities. The noise proved I was doing something important. And now?" She looked toward Avery. "Now I'm not so sure." Eli didn't speak. He just passed her a napkin when a tear slipped down her cheek. By early evening, Charlotte was helping clean up the hangar. She insisted on sweeping, though Eli tried to convince her otherwise. At one point, she paused and looked at a framed photo hanging just inside the tool shed. A woman with dark curls and a wide smile, standing beside a much younger Eli in uniform. "Your wife?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Rachel. She passed 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." "She would have liked you," he said without thinking. Charlotte blinked. "That's, kind." She didn't say much either, but she noticed everything. A silence passed between them, thicker now but not uncomfortable. "I should go," Charlotte said finally. "Avery's due for a real nap, and I promised myself I wouldn't let her sleep in a drawer for more than 2 nights." Eli chuckled. "Fair." She scooped up her daughter and turned toward the door, but before stepping out, she glanced back. "I'll be by tomorrow, if that's all right." "Sure," Eli said. "If you bring more muffins." She smiled. "Deal." That night, the hangar felt quieter, but not empty. Eli sat by the window with the thermos she'd left behind, still half full. He watched the stars blink to life one by one, like a slow revelation. He didn't know what Charlotte's visit had meant. He just knew he wanted it to happen again. And that, for the first time in a long, long while, was enough. Mornings came early in Hope Springs, not because the sun was impatient, but because the town woke slowly, like a man learning how to love again. Eli stood at the workbench, pouring fresh motor oil into a tin-stained container, while the radio played a Hank Williams ballad low enough not to wake the baby. The hangar smelled of dust, grease, and now, subtly, cinnamon, a scent that had lingered ever since Charlotte started showing up with breakfast. She arrived again just past 7:30, wearing a denim jacket over a flannel shirt, her hair tied back in a way that made her look less like a tech mogul and more like someone who belonged here. She carried 2 paper bags and a hopeful expression. "I brought coffee," she said, holding one out like an offering. "And muffins, of course." "You're setting a dangerous precedent," Eli replied, accepting the cup with a half-smile. They stood there a moment, sipping quietly, letting the sounds of the hangar fill the space. The groan of metal expanding in the sun, the distant hum of a lawnmower across the field, Avery's soft hiccup from her portable crib near the window. Charlotte sat on a stool and took a bite of her muffin. "I always thought airports were soulless," she said. "Too much movement, too many people saying goodbye." Eli leaned against the workbench, arms folded. "This one doesn't see many goodbyes. Mostly just waiting." She glanced up at him. "And what are you waiting for?" The question was casual, but it hit harder than he expected. "Nothing," he said after a pause. "Used to think something might show up, but I stopped waiting a long time ago." Charlotte nodded slowly, as if that answer told her more than a full autobiography ever could. They spent most of the day working side by side, not in the way coworkers do, but like people learning the rhythm of each other's silences. Eli taught Charlotte how to torque a bolt without stripping the thread. She showed him how to pair his phone with the Bluetooth speaker Joe had abandoned in the office. Avery, as usual, was content to be passed between them like a sleepy football. She had taken a liking to Charlotte's voice and Eli's beard, grabbing fistfuls of it whenever he leaned in too close. Around noon, they took a break under the wing of the old Beechcraft. Charlotte sat on a blanket, Avery in her lap, while Eli handed her a bottle of water. "I used to think love meant velocity," Charlotte said, "that if it wasn't sweeping and overwhelming and all-consuming, it wasn't real." Eli sat beside her, careful not to touch, but close enough to feel the gravity of her presence. "And now?" he asked. "Now I think love might be this." She gestured vaguely to the hangar, the fields beyond it, the baby in her lap. "Quiet, steady, the kind that shows up before you even ask." Eli didn't say anything, but something in him shifted again, another quiet crack in a wall he hadn't meant to build so high. Later that afternoon, Charlotte wandered to the edge of the tarmac, while Eli checked a faulty fuel pump. She stood at the fence, staring out across the prairie. He watched her from a distance, how still she was, how small against that endless sky, and something in his chest ached in a way that felt both dangerous and necessary. When she came back, her cheeks were flushed with wind and thought. "I think I'm afraid of slowing down," she said. "Why?" "Because I might not know who I am without the motion." "You'd still be Avery's mom," he said. She looked at him, the edges of her eyes tightening with something unreadable. "That used to be the one title I wasn't sure I'd earn." "You earned it the moment you walked back through that door," Eli said, "and probably long before." A pause, then, quietly, she replied, "You talk like someone who's lost something." "I have." They let the silence speak after that. That evening, the three of them sat on the front steps of the hangar. Eli had pulled out an old guitar, strings slightly out of tune, and strummed a gentle, broken melody. Avery babbled along, kicking her socks off for the 4th time that day. Charlotte wrapped a blanket around her legs and leaned slightly, just slightly closer to him. The sun was slipping beneath the wheat fields, throwing golden light across their faces. "This is the most still I've been in a decade," Charlotte whispered. "Still doesn't mean stuck," Eli said. "Sometimes it just means you're where you're supposed to be." Avery yawned, and Charlotte kissed the top of her head. Eli kept playing, the chords simple, unfinished. And for a moment, all three of them just were. No past, no future, just that fragile sliver of now. The wind rolled in fast. By late afternoon, the sky had gone from honeyed blue to a strange, bruised gray. Clouds stacked like angry books over the northern hills. The radio in the hangar crackled with a weather alert, the kind that made locals mutter about summer's temper and head for cover. Eli stood in the doorway, a wrench in his hand, watching dust whip across the tarmac in wild spirals. Behind him, Avery cooed from her bassinet, blissfully unaware of the change in pressure. Charlotte stepped beside him, arms crossed, her brow furrowed as the first sharp gust rattled the hangar's metal siding. She glanced up at the ceiling, then back at Eli. "Should we take her inside?" "You're already inside," he said. "This hangar's older than both of us put together, but it's solid." She gave a tight, unsure nod. "Still doesn't feel like the kind of place I'd pick for a sleepover." Eli looked at her. "You trust me?" Her eyes didn't waver. "Yes." He nodded. "Then you're fine." The wind howled louder. Somewhere outside, a plastic barrel rolled down the gravel lot, clattering like a bad omen. As the storm picked up, Eli pulled down the heavy hangar doors. Rain began to pelt the roof in sudden, chaotic rhythms, thunder low and rolling. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Inside, the air took on a damp chill. He brought out blankets and a camping lantern, placing them near the couch. Charlotte helped settle Avery into a cozy nest of towels and baby quilts. The baby yawned, unfazed, and curled into sleep with the quiet surrender only children could manage. Eli struck a match, lighting the tiny gas stove in the corner that he used for coffee and soup. He poured water into a pot and added 2 packs of instant ramen, 1 chicken, 1 spicy. Charlotte raised an eyebrow as she watched him work. "This is what you eat when there's a tornado outside?" He shrugged. "I was a mechanic in the Air Force. Ramen's practically currency." She smiled, the kind that came with a soft exhale. "I haven't eaten anything this artificial in 10 years. "Well," he said, "tonight's about survival." Gourmet comes after lightning stops trying to make conversation. They sat on the floor across from each other, legs crossed, eating from mismatched bowls. The rain roared above them, but inside it felt like a different world. A bubble of warmth wrapped in thunder. After dinner, Charlotte leaned against an old support beam, a blanket draped across her lap. Eli sat nearby on a tool chest, nursing a 3rd cup of black coffee. "I used to love storms," she said. "What changed?" "I had a miscarriage during one," she said simply. "Before Avery, a flash flood shut down the hospital wing for a few hours. I was stuck in triage, alone. My then-husband was in Tokyo." Eli didn't speak. He just looked at her, really looked, not out of pity, but understanding. "People think women forget," she added, "that we just move on. But your body remembers, even if your mind tries not to." He nodded slowly. "My wife died 2 days after giving birth. Preeclampsia. We knew it was risky. She wanted to try anyway." Charlotte turned to him, eyes wide. "You had a baby?" "For a day," he said. "She lived 22 hours. We named her Emily." Silence settled like dust, thick and gentle. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Me too." They sat that way for a long time, nothing between them but memory and rain. No need to fill the space, just holding it together, like survivors in the same lifeboat. Avery woke near midnight, fussy and confused by the shifting air pressure. Charlotte moved to pick her up, but Eli stopped her with a gesture. "Let me." She watched as he lifted the baby, rocked her gently, whispered soft words into her ear. It wasn't a performance. It was instinct. He moved with the ease of someone who had practiced long ago and never truly forgotten. Charlotte sat back, arms folded loosely around her knees. "She's different with you," she said softly. "Calmer, more grounded." "She knows I've been broken too," he said. Charlotte looked up, her eyes shimmering in the lantern light. "You ever think about trying again?" He considered the question. "I used to. Then I stopped. Now, I don't know." "Me neither," she said. "But lately, something about being here makes me wonder." He looked at her, long and quiet. Then Avery hiccuped, and both of them laughed. Eventually, Avery drifted off again, and Eli laid her gently back in her nest. Charlotte stood, stretching, her silhouette tall against the flickering light. "I should get some rest," she said. He nodded. "Take the couch." "You sure?" "I'll take the floor." This isn't my first storm rodeo. She hesitated, then stepped closer. Eli? Yeah, thank you. For the ramen and everything else. He gave a small smile. Anytime. She leaned in, just enough to rest her hand against his chest for a brief second. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't even intimacy. It was trust. And somehow, in the heart of a storm, that felt like more than enough. The storm passed in the early hours, slipping away like a thief who had taken only what was already broken. By morning, the skies above Hope Springs were soft and apologetic, washed in pale gold, as if to make up for the bruises of the night before. The hangar smelled of rain and machine oil. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang like nothing had ever gone wrong. Eli was already up, kneeling beside the Beechcraft with a socket wrench in hand, though nothing on the plane needed urgent fixing. Some habits weren't about necessity, they were about control, and after the kind of night they'd had, control felt like something worth pretending to have. Charlotte hadn't come out from the apartment yet. He'd offered her the couch, and she'd taken it, curling beneath a patchwork quilt like someone unused to warmth. He'd taken the floor by choice, near Avery, who had slept better than either of them. But now the baby was awake, gurgling softly in the cradle, and Charlotte hadn't stirred. Eli stole a glance toward the stairs. He could hear nothing. She emerged a little after 8, wearing the same flannel shirt and jeans from the day before. Her hair pulled up hastily. There were faint creases under her eyes. Nothing dramatic, just signs that she had lived through something. Quietly. She offered him a tight smile as she reached for the coffee pot. "Morning," she said. He nodded. "Morning." That was it. No mention of the night before. No reference to the conversation, the ramen, the hand she'd placed on his chest. It hung in the air like smoke from a candle long blown out. He didn't press. Neither did she. By mid-morning, Charlotte had packed her bag, cleaned the apartment more thoroughly than necessary, and folded every blanket twice. Her movements were efficient, even brisk. Only her eyes gave her away, lingering too long on Avery, flickering toward Eli when she thought he wasn't looking. They sat together for one last coffee on the bench near the hangar doors. The air outside was warm and bright, but something between them had cooled. "I should be getting back," she said, cradling her cup. Eli nodded slowly. "Figured. I've got a meeting in Bozeman, then New York after that." "You'll be gone long?" She hesitated. "Not sure. Maybe a week. Maybe more." He looked down at his hands. They were steady, cleaner than usual, almost like he'd been trying to make a good impression. "I appreciate everything you've done," she said. "For Avery. For me." He nodded again. "You don't have to thank me, Charlotte." "Yes, I do." Her voice caught slightly. "Because no one ever has." There it was again, that thing between them, raw and barely formed. A space where something might grow, if only they had the courage to name it. But neither of them did. She gathered Avery in her arms. The baby reached instinctively toward Eli, babbling a sound that could have been his name, or could have just been a sound. But it landed like a stone in his chest all the same. He walked them to the SUV. The engine purred like it had the first time she'd arrived. Too polished, too ready to leave. Charlotte buckled Avery into the back seat, then paused with the door open. She turned to face him, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I don't know what this was," she said softly, "but I'm glad it happened." He held her gaze. "Me too." A long pause. "If I come back, you'll be welcome." Another pause. "And if I don't?" Eli didn't look away. "Then I'll still be glad you were here." She nodded once, bit her lip, then got in the car. The door shut with a final click. The SUV pulled away in a trail of dust, and Eli stood there long after the sound of tires had faded. The hangar felt larger that afternoon, not just emptier, hollow. Eli went back to work on the Beechcraft, though he found himself replacing bolts that didn't need replacing, rechecking connections that were already fine. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It pressed in around him, echoing with laughter that had filled this space just days earlier. By sunset, he sat alone on the front step, guitar in hand, though he didn't play. His fingers traced the strings like memory. He looked out at the horizon where the SUV had vanished. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe a message, a sign, a reason to believe it had meant something more. Instead, he got wind, and the last light of day. That night, Eli pulled out the old box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos. Rachel's smile, the sonogram of baby Emily, hospital bracelets, sympathy cards. He sat with it open on his lap for a long time, staring at the life he had once known. Then he added one more thing, the tiny pink beanie Avery had worn, just in case this too was a goodbye. By the following Monday, life at Hope Springs Airport had returned to what it had always been, quiet, mechanical, and slow. The clouds above the runway moved like folded linens, and the morning breeze carried the scent of cut grass from a nearby farm. Inside Hangar 3, Eli Carter stood with his sleeves rolled and his jaw set, replacing the spark plugs on the Cessna that hadn't flown since early spring. His hands worked as they always had, steady, precise, but something in his posture had changed. Where once there had been the stubborn endurance of a man moving just to survive the day, now there was a tension that came from trying not to hope for too much, trying not to remember. But memory wasn't something a man could shut off like a light switch. It clung to the edges of the hangar, on the blanket folded in the corner where Avery had napped, on the thermos Charlotte had forgotten on the bench, still holding the faint aroma of cinnamon spiced tea. Eli hadn't touched any of it. He told himself he was just busy, that the planes needed him, that maybe the sheriff would finally call with something useful. But deep down, he knew what it really was. He missed them. Not just the baby, though Avery had carved a space in his chest he couldn't unmake. It was Charlotte, too. The way she filled a room without trying. The way her silences weren't empty, but full of thought, like wind brushing through the tall grass. She had come in like a question, and now she was gone like a comma, leaving everything unfinished. He drove into town that afternoon, stopping at the local hardware store for a new oil filter. The man behind the counter, Jack, who'd known Eli since they were both in high school, raised an eyebrow when he saw him. "No baby today?" Jack asked, grinning in that way small-town folks do when they pretend they're not curious. Eli shook his head. "She's with her mother." Jack nodded, sensing the shift. "Good little one. You did right by her." Eli didn't answer. He just paid and left. Outside, he paused before getting into his truck. Across the street, the post office flag fluttered at half-mast for someone whose name he didn't recognize. It made him think of all the things that passed in small towns without anyone noticing, the quiet acts of grace, the private griefs. He drove slowly on the way back, letting the open road unwind beneath his tires like a kind of meditation. Back at the airport, he stopped by the office to check messages. Nothing from Charlotte, nothing from CPS, just a package of wing bolts and a flyer about a regional air show he'd never attend. Joe poked his head in a few minutes later, holding a cup of gas station coffee and a bag of peanuts. "Plane looks good," he said, nodding toward the hangar. "Needs a new alternator," Eli replied. "The rest cosmetic." "You eating?" Eli shrugged. "Enough." "You sleeping?" Another shrug. Joe sat in the beat-up swivel chair and tossed him the peanuts. "You know, when my wife left me, I thought the worst part would be the silence. But turns out it's the waiting for someone to come back, or at least to tell you they're not coming." Eli looked over. "And she never came back," Joe said, cracking a shell. "But I stopped waiting, started fixing up that old church on Oak Street, helping out at the community garden. Got tired of watching the door." Eli said nothing, but the words landed, not like an answer, but like permission. That evening, just before sunset, a pickup truck stalled outside the fence line. Eli saw it from the hangar window, a young woman stepping out with a toddler on her hip, both of them looking tired and a little lost. A flat tire, no cell service. He grabbed his toolbox and headed out without hesitation. The woman explained in halting English that she'd been driving to Missoula, but her spare was useless, and her son was running a fever. Eli didn't ask questions. He jacked up the truck, replaced the tire, handed her a cold bottle of water, and gently placed his palm on the toddler's forehead. "Still cool," he said, "but keep him hydrated." Tears welled up in the woman's eyes. "Thank you. I don't know how to." "You don't have to," Eli said. She drove away 15 minutes later, waving until she disappeared down the road. Back inside, Eli sat on the folding bench. Dirt on his jeans, oil on his hands, and silence pressing around him. But it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. Like maybe he didn't need a reason to be kind, or a guarantee that love would return. Maybe it was enough to be the place where lost people found help. Maybe healing came from doing what needed to be done, even when no one was watching. He reached for the pink beanie in the drawer and held it gently, thumb brushing across the knit stitches. "Still here," he said aloud. "Still showing up." He wasn't waiting anymore. He was living. The day Charlotte came back, it was a Tuesday like any other. Eli was beneath the nose of a Piper cub, replacing a frayed ignition wire, sweat trailing from his brow in the late afternoon heat. The radio played low in the background. Patsy Cline, something mournful and beautiful, and the hangar smelled of metal, oil, and dust baked into sun-warmed concrete. He didn't hear the SUV until it had already pulled up outside the hangar. At first, he didn't look up, just kept working, assuming it was Joe or the mailman with a part shipment. It wasn't until he heard the car door open and a small voice squeal with delight that he froze. He set the wrench down and slowly turned toward the hangar entrance. And there she was. Charlotte stood in the doorway, wearing jeans and a soft ivory blouse that fluttered slightly in the breeze. Her hair was longer than he remembered, or maybe just looser. And in her arms was Avery, now a few weeks older, rounder in the cheeks, eyes even brighter than before. Avery saw him and let out a high, delighted babble, squirming in her mother's arms. Eli wiped his hands on a rag, speechless. "Hey," Charlotte said, her voice quiet but steady. He stepped forward, heart thudding. "You came back," he said. "I said I would." There was no drama in it, no apology, no justifications. Just her standing there with a baby on her hip and something in her eyes that looked an awful lot like home. Inside, they sat at the workbench, just like before, a thermos of fresh brewed coffee between them. Charlotte had brought blueberry muffins. Avery was nestled in the crook of Eli's arm, gnawing peacefully on the ear of a stuffed elephant. "I kept trying to write you," Charlotte said. "Emails, a letter, a message. But nothing felt right." Eli nodded. "Some things don't fit in words." She looked around the hangar, taking in the little signs that nothing had changed, and somehow, everything had. "You fixed the Piper," she said, nodding toward the aircraft behind them. "Eventually," he replied. "Takes time, but it'll fly again." She gave him a small smile. "So will I. That's why I came." He turned to her, unsure what she meant. "I turned down the redevelopment offer," she continued. "All of it. The logistics hub, the corporate bids. I told my board it didn't feel right anymore." "And it didn't." Eli's brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because this place isn't broken," she said. "It's rare, sacred even. And I don't want to tear that down. I want to build it up." He stared at her, trying to read between the lines. "I want to reopen the airport," she said. "Not for big business. For people who love planes, students, hobbyists, community pilots. And I want you to run the maintenance side." Eli blinked. "You trust me with that?" "I trust you with more than that." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were sketches, plans, a proposal that had clearly taken weeks to craft. "I brought everything," she said, "because I didn't just come back for a visit." He stared down at the papers, then back at her. "And if I say no?" She took a breath. "Then I'll respect that. I'll still leave the plans with you. I'll still invest in the airport. But I won't stay." Avery gurgled softly in his arms, as if offering her vote. Eli looked down at the baby, then up at the woman who had once left quietly, and now stood before him offering not just a job, but a future. "You really mean that?" he said. "I really do." They stepped outside a little before sunset, the sky spilling amber light over the hills. The breeze was warm and dry, and the fields whispered like they'd been waiting for this moment too. Eli carried Avery on his hip, her arms wrapped lazily around his neck. Charlotte walked beside him, her shoulder brushing his every few steps. "I thought a lot while I was gone," she said, "about what matters, about what makes me feel like myself. And it wasn't boardrooms or budgets. It wasn't New York. It was here." She stopped and turned to him. "It was watching you hum lullabies to a baby who wasn't yours. It was learning how to breathe again in the smell of old engines and Montana dust. It was sitting on the floor during a storm eating ramen with a man who didn't ask for anything but gave everything anyway. Eli didn't speak. Charlotte smiled. I'm not good at grand gestures, but I'm here, if that counts for something. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. It counts for everything. Later that evening, they sat together on the front steps of the hangar, Avery asleep between them in a travel bassinet. The stars blinked on one by one, shy but steady. Eli looked over at Charlotte. You staying long? That depends, she said. You still have that couch? He chuckled. It's all yours. She leaned her head lightly on his shoulder. They didn't speak again for a while. They didn't need to. The hangar behind them stood open, waiting, and the sky ahead was wide and clear. The morning of the airfield's reopening was impossibly clear. Sunlight spilled across the Montana plains in golden ribbons, warming the tin roofs and dew-damp grass. Hope Springs, a town that had grown used to standing still, was stirring again. The rusted fence lines had been mended, the hangars painted, and the runway repaved, not to erase history, but to honor it. Eli stood at the edge of the tarmac, the morning breeze tugging at the collar of his shirt. In his hand was a small clipboard with a checklist he knew by heart, but still reviewed, because some habits were worth keeping. Behind him, laughter echoed from the hangar, Charlotte's soft, musical laugh, and the unmistakable squeal of a baby discovering her own voice. Avery had taken her first steps last week, not alone, but then again, she'd never really had to be. The last few months had passed not with urgency, but with steady rhythm. Charlotte had moved into the apartment above the hangar, not permanently, she insisted, but Eli noticed she hadn't mentioned a return flight to New York in a long while. The airport, once half forgotten, had become a small hub of life again. Students came for weekend flying lessons. Local retirees gathered for morning coffee by the airstrip. The old windsock snapped proudly in the wind, as if waving to a new chapter. Today marked the official reopening, just a soft community event with homemade banners and thermoses of lemonade, but it felt like something bigger. Something earned. Charlotte stepped out of the hangar, carrying Avery on her hip, her hair tied back with one of Rachel's old scarves. She was dressed in jeans and a white button-up shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a smear of baby food on her collarbone she hadn't noticed yet. You ready? She asked, squinting against the sun. Eli nodded. Almost. Avery leaned forward and offered him a slobbery high five, which he accepted with mock solemnity. You in charge of pre-flight checks now? He asked her. Charlotte laughed. She's got your stubbornness. Let's hope that's all she gets. Charlotte stepped closer, brushing her shoulder against his. It wouldn't be the worst thing, you know, growing up with a man like you. He turned toward her slowly. You sure you're okay staying? The city's not exactly around the corner. I have a daughter who sleeps through the night in a hangar, she said. I'm better than okay. They smiled at each other, not the way people do in movies, but the way people do when they've built something out of quiet trust and earned affection. Then came the low, rumbling sound of a small plane circling overhead. Eli shaded his eyes and looked up. They're early. Perfect timing, Charlotte said, stepping back and hoisting Avery higher on her hip. Go meet them. I'll handle the crowd. And he glanced toward the makeshift parking area where cars were already pulling in. Locals, families, a few curious pilots who'd heard about a place where people still fix things with their hands. Eli handed her the clipboard. You're the boss. Not today, she said with a wink. Today you are. As the guests arrived, the old airfield came alive in a way that felt impossible months ago. Children ran between folding chairs, eyes wide at the parked planes. Elderly neighbors swapped stories with returning veterans. And in the middle of it all, Eli moved like he belonged, not as a man in hiding, but as a man who had chosen to stay. The highlight of the day came at noon. Charlotte took the mic, standing on a wooden pallet that served as a stage. She spoke not like a CEO, but like someone who had been changed by the place she stood on. We came here looking for a project, she told the gathered crowd. What we found was a community, and in this hangar, under these wings, we found something rare, a chance to begin again. Applause rippled through the audience, warm and real. She stepped down and walked to Eli, taking his hand in front of everyone, not with spectacle, but with certainty. Then she handed him a small envelope. He opened it carefully. Inside was a certificate, printed on cream cardstock. Flight certification renewal. Elijah Carter. He looked up at her. I made a few calls, she said. It's not too late. Eli stared at the document, then at the runway behind her. The rebuilt airstrip stretched wide and long, gleaming in the afternoon sun. A second chance, as clear as the horizon itself. You really want me to fly again? He asked. I want you to live again, she said. Later, as the sun dropped low and painted the airfield in rose-gold hues, Eli stood in the cockpit of the Beechcraft. Charlotte sat in the back with Avery nestled against her chest, asleep, one small hand clutching the seatbelt like a toy. The engine hummed beneath him, steady and sure. As the plane lifted gently from the runway, the town grew smaller behind them. The mountains ahead glowed in the late light. The sky opened wide. Eli glanced back. Charlotte met his eyes and smiled, then rested her cheek against Avery's head. He faced forward, his hands on the yoke, heart calm. And for the first time in years, he flew, not to escape, not to run, but to rise. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know which part of the world you call home. Drop a comment below and say hi. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories just like this one. Your support helps this channel grow and keeps the stories coming. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and take care.